Tourism and Travel in Ancient Egypt. Travel Like an Egyptian. Part 1 by Muhammad Yahya Zakaria Ahmed. Narrated by Becky Parker. Produced by Pro Audio Voices. Dedication. Egypt has been a source of knowledge and continues to inspire. Egypt has great stories to tell and explore. I always love hearing the famous song of Walk Like an Egyptian. Now, I guess after listening to this book, you will not only walk like an Egyptian, but also travel like the ancient Egyptians, where tourism and travel were familiar 7,000 years ago. To my family, who introduced me to the joy of reading from birth, to my beloved country, with great and unique history and civilization, Egypt, where it all begins. I dedicate this book, Muhammad Ahmed. Acknowledgements. This work would not have been possible without the technical support of Pro Audio Voices. I am especially indebted to Becky Parker Geist. She is such an amazing person and very helpful. I appreciate her valuable advice, editing, and professional proofreading that makes my dream come true of turning my book into a fascinating audiobook with such a lovely voice. I would like to thank my parents and friends for being such a huge support through my experiences. Love you all. Now, I remember the following quote from the ancient Egyptian literature text saying, "Follow your heart while you're alive. Put perfume on your head. Clothe yourself with fine linen. Make holiday, and don't forget it." Harpist Song, about 1400 BC. Geographically, Egypt is divided into two parts, the Delta in the north and the Nile Valley in the center and south, that is, Lower and Upper Egypt. Throughout the historical period we call Ancient Egypt, the majority of the Egyptian land was bare, arid desert, with a few oases providing the only places to support any life. Out of a total area of 386,000 square miles, 1 million square kilometers, less than 13,500 square miles, 35,000 square kilometers, were cultivated. The geography of the land made the overall transport difficult, except for the boats, which were dependent on the Nile and its subsidiary canals. According to Breyer and Hobbs, travel outside the Egyptian borders, which is now called outbound or outgoing travel, was allowed to all Egyptians. This means that the demographic approach to travel in ancient Egypt ignored the bias in gender or distinction between the rulers and individual people. Conversely, Baines assumed that only privileged persons had the right to engage in traveling outside Egypt. He illustrated that travel to other countries was sometimes monopolized by high officials in a country as privileged peoples. In this context, Breyer and Hobbs referred to the reason of monopoly due to Egypt's demand of certain foreign commodities that required elite people to travel to obtain these goods. This argument was in agreement with David, who indicated that the king and administrative high officials were acting as the decision-makers about which commodities should be traded with foreign lands, and who were eager to travel, since it concerned state affairs. In general, the smooth life of ancient Egyptians allowed travel to be increased, particularly if they had money and could afford either to charter a ship or stay with friends at private houses. The ancient Egyptian woman loved to accompany her husband for various trips on the Nile. Cross-reference the analytical approach of the scenes that will be discussed in Chapter 6. Egyptian women were part of daily life in ancient Egypt and had an important role in the Egyptian civilization. Sometimes princesses traveled to Egypt in exchange to the pharaoh and to pay the tribute. Figure 2, a Syrian trading venture to Egypt, shows Syrian princesses traveling to Egypt to bring tribute to the pharaoh. The tribute included gold vases adorned with lotus flowers, golden perfume containers, and lapis lazuli. Barber claimed also that Egyptian women accompanied their husbands at recreation times and during their hunting and fishing expeditions. There are numerous scenes which prove this fact. Cross-reference scenes of Userhat. It also indicates the importance of women to mobility and travel activity in ancient Egypt. Furthermore, the criteria for permission to travel in ancient Egypt were ruled by fairness and honesty. Sertima stressed that the characteristics of travel served to demonstrate social justice, at least in travel, across social classes from the poor to wealthy. This fact has been proven by the number of trips that the royal members of the Egyptian kingdoms did, as well as other ordinary people. In this perspective, Sertima comments on how the ancient Egyptian text that says, "Give bread to the hungry, water to the thirsty, clothes to the naked, and a boat to those without one," could reflect justice in ancient Egypt. However, the author believes that this text may reveal the high demand for travel, especially for the poor people. Egyptians gave travel high priority in relation to other personal and crucial social demands, such as eating, drinking, and dressing. There is an indication to the reader of this text that the boat as a means of travel and trade was essential to the poor people. Highlighting the importance of the above-stated text, Lichtheim commented that the text was written twice, in 3 columns on each side of the false door of Nefersekhem-Re at Saqqara, and belongs to the 6th dynasty. It took travelers weeks to get from one end of Egypt to the other. Many of the Egyptian outbound trading. Egypt is described as a unique country with a long history of great kings and queens. Both ancient Egyptian history and civilization have an influence on the modern world. This civilization was established in the Nile Valley. Its blessings were distributed in whole parts of Egypt and extended to other surrounding countries that were connected to Egypt during that time. In this regard, Fakhri assures us that it is wrong to think that the ancient Egyptian civilization was in any way isolated due to the fact that ancient Egyptian civilization was impacted by the other East Mediterranean nations and civilizations. The ancient Egyptian daily life circled around the Nile and the fertile land along its banks. Therefore, it is logical that several scholars assume that the Nile was important to various activities of the ancient Egyptians. Travel within the Egyptian land and to other countries occurred as part of these activities. Ancient and recent discoveries have proven that the Nile granted Egyptians a great support to move from one place to another. Travel in ancient Egypt was regarded as a kind of prestigious mission to the person who was sent by the order of the king. Ancient Egyptian travelers had the honor to be sent on missions in order to fulfill their tasks through completing successful journeys. Therefore, travel was done exclusively by the high culture and elite persons, and it was connected considerably to one's official duty in a position. That is to say, that it was a part of one's job. Harris and Pemberton state that a few of the Egyptians were interested in traveling to foreign lands in order to enjoy themselves with stories of adventure and participate in interesting activities such as trade, diplomacy, and warfare. On the contrary, David emphasized that the main motive of ancient Egyptians that stimulated them to enter commercial and trading activities with other lands was to obtain commodities that were scarce in Egypt, and not for the sake of adventure. Moreover, Harris and Pemberton believe that within the Egyptian land there were markets situated in towns and villages as the main trading places, where the people used to make transactions between themselves. That was one of the reasons that encouraged the ancient Egyptians to travel internally. The authors assume that it was common in ancient Egypt to see traveling salesmen who sailed up and down the Nile visiting homes. Hence, we can conclude that commerce and a spirit of adventure were sufficient reasons for ancient Egyptians to travel either domestically or internationally. Thanks to the wide travel activity, Egypt kept its friendly relations with its Near East and Mediterranean neighbors. However, it seemed to be too difficult for the Egyptians to travel due to the long time it took to reach the countries that are overlooking the coastal area and the dangers of crossing the Mediterranean Sea. The ancient Egyptian artists did not want to leave without documenting their trips. Therefore, the artists inscribed on the stones and on scraps of pottery bartering details of the ancient Egyptians' travels and what they did during their voyages from the earliest times of Egyptian history. Apart from commerce and adventure, there were other motives that drew the ancient Egyptians to travel. For instance, leisure was a motive for travels. Although Harris and Pemberton emphasized that traveling for pleasure was unusual before Greek and Roman times, Holloway and Taylor claim that travel for pleasure was existent in ancient Egypt, where the people relied on their journeys on the Nile River. This is considered the most important source of their entertainment and travel. How ancient Egyptians knew the locations of these resources is evident and documented on the wall of the tomb of Oy at El Amarna, as the great Hymn to the Aten shows. Ships fare north, fare south as well, roads lie open when you rise. The fish in the river dart before you, your rays are in the midst of the sea. Other documentary evidence of navigation in ancient Egypt is the oldest geological map that was invented in Egypt. This map shows gold mines in the Wadi el-Hammamet in the eastern desert. It dates back to the reign of Ramses IV, circa 1150 BC, and is displayed in the Egyptian Museum at Turin, Italy. From the tale of the Shipwrecked Sailor, there is another proof that indicates the reaction of Egyptian sailors when there were unexpected disasters. Part of the tale shows that when a storm suddenly hit, the sailors had to stop at the nearest place and have a rest until the storm ended. The duration of a stay at the nearest place, which was an island in the story, was for 3 days. The place that was proper for shelter was beside trees, where many foods came from. A storm came up while we were at sea, before we could reach land. As we sailed it made a swell, and in it a wave 8 cubits tall. The mast, the wave, struck it. Then the ship died. Of those in it, not one remained. I was cast on an island by a wave of the sea. I spent 3 days alone, with my heart as companion. Lying in the shelter of trees, I hugged the shade. Indeed, the water of the canals and the Nile was too deep for wading. Sinai was a natural extension of Kemet, located in the eastern part of Egypt. It was not only a well-known destination in ancient Egypt and the main source of copper and turquoise, but was also regarded as a holy place and trade center. Sinai was an important place to the Egyptians because of the resources of metals that were lacking in the rest of the Egyptian territory. Sava Sodebeya explained why the ancient Egyptians established quarries in Sinai. Sava Sodebeya claims copper was not the only metal that was rich in Sinai. Another important item was the blue, semi-precious stone known as turquoise. The extraction of turquoise from the stone quarries near Mahara and Serbit el-Khadim in the southern part of the Sinai Peninsula began during the 3rd dynasty and continued throughout the history of ancient Egypt until around 1000 BC. In addition, Clayton stated that one of the trading and explorative excursions was mounted to the turquoise mines of Sinai, especially to the area of Serbit el-Khadim, where Hatshepsut's name has been recorded. This has been Tourism and Travel in Ancient Egypt. Travel Like an Egyptian. Part 1. By Muhammad Yahya Zakaria Ahmed. Narrated by Becky Parker. Copyright 2017 by Muhammad Ahmed. Production copyright 2017 by Muhammad Ahmed. This book is continued in Tourism and Travel in Ancient Egypt, Travel Like an Egyptian, Part 2. For more information and to view the images and illustrations included in the e-book and print editions of this book, visit Tourism and Travel in Ancient